Father Chris Alar shared that it's been less than 4 days since the Olympic opening ceremonies, and it's already Friday. These ceremonies have sparked significant discussion worldwide, particularly within the Catholic community. I know many of you are probably tired of hearing about this, and I hadn't planned on addressing it. In fact, I didn't want to speak on it until the IOC issued a statement about the event. Now, there's been talk of an apology, but if you look closely, it's the typical, "I'm sorry you're offended" type, which isn't an admission of any wrongdoing but rather a way of saying, "I'm sorry you misunderstood." I believe it's crucial to address their claims that this isn't about the Last Supper because there are key points being overlooked. First, while they insist it wasn't an attack on the Last Supper, they're not addressing several other aspects. Before discussing the Last Supper, they do acknowledge that the headless woman represented Marie Antoinette. They were quick to label her as treasonous, conspiring, and executed for stealing from the state. They portrayed her as heartless by referencing the infamous phrase, "let them eat cake," suggesting she was indifferent to the suffering of the poor. This was cited as one reason for her execution. However, historically, Marie Antoinette never said, "let them eat cake." This is a classic example of the misinformation that fueled the French Revolution, the event that marked the beginning of the end for Christian monarchies in Europe. World War I later confirmed or concluded the elimination of Catholic monarchies in Europe. This was part of a broader agenda, starting with the vilification of Marie Antoinette, who was, in fact, a good queen. The real issue was that the state was becoming a new god, with human reason taking the place of divine authority. As I mentioned, World War I was the culmination of what the French Revolution began. They claimed it wasn't a depiction of the Last Supper, but rather an ancient Greek celebration called a bacchanal. However, if you watch it again, they actually portrayed both. First, the drag queens were positioned in a way that closely resembled the 12 apostles at the Last Supper table. Even the head angles and arm placements were almost identical if you compare the images side by side. It's hard to deny the resemblance. It's true that after that, they transitioned into a promiscuous scene representing the bacchanal. So in reality, they depicted both the Last Supper first, followed by the bacchanal. So, when they say it was about the bacchanal, they're only partially right. What they're not acknowledging is that the Last Supper was mocked beforehand. There's also no mention in their apology or the Olympic statement about the 10-year-old child who was on stage near the table with a man displaying his body parts. They explained that the scene was meant to honor Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, who is also the god of ecstasy. The thing is, they're openly admitting to honoring these gods and goddesses who are pagan deities. As St. Paul warned, worshipping pagan gods is equivalent to worshipping demons, no exceptions. The Roman name for the Greek god Dionysus, the god of pleasure, is Bacchus. He was represented by the blue figure in what you might call the opening ceremonies. They also claim that the horseman depicted wasn't Death but Sequana, the goddess of the Seine, who was the daughter of Dionysus. Once again, we see the veneration of these pagan goddesses, which symbolizes resistance. And what was that resistance? The French Revolution, which led to the destruction of Catholicism in France. So, this isn't just an innocent, benign celebration as the Olympics are trying to portray it's an attack, or at least a tribute to the attack, on the Catholic Church. They mentioned that the performance was inspired by a 17th-century Dutch painting. However, if you examine the painting, it also mocks the Last Supper. So, if they're imitating that painting, they're imitating something that mocks the Last Supper. This is all so absurd. But if we take their claims at face value that this has nothing to do with the Last Supper, here's the smoking gun. The person in the center, whether a woman or a man, though I assume a woman since her name was Barbara Butch, who was portraying the Christ-like figure, had posted the Last Supper painting on her Instagram account. This post has since been removed. If this wasn't about the Last Supper, then why did the central figure, Barbara Butch, post a painting of the Last Supper on Instagram with the caption, oh yes, the New Gay Testament? This post has since been removed, conveniently after the Olympics changed their narrative, claiming this wasn't an attack on the Last Supper. But I have to ask the IOC, if this truly wasn't an attack on the Last Supper, why did your main performer, Barbara Butch, post an image of the Last Supper on Instagram with the caption, oh yes, we have achieved our goal, the Gay New Testament? I also want to point out that many people have been misled by the seemingly innocent and harmless nature of drag queens. Essentially, this event was a drag queen show, that's what it was. While drag queens have been around for a long time, they are now portrayed in our society as benign, lovable figures, much like RuPaul. Friendly, harmless. Bring your children, they'll teach them how to read. However, this may not be as innocent as it seems. In one sense, I can acknowledge that this might not be a direct attack on the Eucharist or even on the Last Supper. There is some logic to that argument. After reviewing this in great detail and discussing it with some of our priests, it doesn't appear to be an outright attack on the Eucharist. So, I'll concede that point, or possibly even about the Last Supper. But what it does target is Catholicism as a whole. Why? Because this entire movement stems from what is known as queer theory. This movement was initiated by Michel Foucault, a French activist, and it's fundamentally an attack on Catholicism, which they view as the oppressor of their sexual morals. I hesitate to even call them morals. Perhaps sexual behaviors is more accurate. At the top of their hierarchy are traditional heterosexual marriages between a man and a woman. I use the word normal, knowing it might draw criticism, but it's how God defined it, a union between a man and a woman. So, at the top are these heterosexual marriages, and as you go down the hierarchy, you find deviants like pedophiles and those involved in bestiality at the bottom. Isn't it crazy that we're even having this conversation? It really is. It's just unbelievable. But the stakes are high because souls are at risk. I've received numerous letters asking, Father, why are you spending time on this? The answer is simple. Souls are at stake. At the bottom of this hierarchy are these deviants who aim to dismantle laws. Their goal is to elevate this deviant behavior to the level of normalcy, with drag queens serving as their evangelists. This isn't something I'm making up, it's openly stated by thinkers like Gail Rubin and Michel Foucault. Their aim is to normalize this deviancy and remove laws that protect children and others from practices like bestiality. So why the attack on Catholicism? Because Catholicism rightly calls this behavior what it is, evil. In their view, that's why it must be eradicated. They are trying to turn everything upside down, using the supposed innocence and charm of drag queens as their messengers. But drag queens are not harmless entertainment. They are not who you should be taking your children to for story time. There's a deeper agenda here, one aimed at indoctrinating our children. This is a crisis of unprecedented proportions, not like World War II, which was a military conflict, but a crisis that is a takeover of the soul. Yesterday, or rather Sunday, we posted a video that's already nearing 1 million views. Thank you for sharing it. We've received many comments, both positive and negative. I want to apologize because some people were upset the email I provided didn't work. I'm not sure if it was changed or what happened, but I apologize for the inconvenience. We've since done our research and found a working email for anyone who wants to make their voice heard, as Bishop Barron suggested. The correct email is pressoffice@olympic.org, one word. We're sorry for the confusion earlier. Now, we need to pray. Today is the feast day, though it's not listed in the Ordo of Solanus Casey. Solanus Casey is one of my top 5 saints. I always talk about my top 5, which includes Saint Louis IX, the only king of France to be canonized, Saint Charbel, and of course, Mary, Joseph, and Saint Faustina. Solanus Casey is an ideal example for us to turn to in these times. He spent much of his life in Detroit, and I used to visit his tomb in some of the rougher areas of the city. People would tell me, "Father, you're crazy for going down there, it's not safe. What are you doing?" But I loved being there. I would talk with the homeless and others in the area, and I never felt afraid. I believe that blessed Solanus Casey is watching over that place. He exemplifies humility and surrendering our will and pride to do God's will. The central issue we're dealing with in all these events, the ceremonies, the Olympics, and the French Revolution, boils down to one thing: pride. It's ironic that June is called Pride Month. Let's pray and ask for God's protection, especially if you're taking a stand. If you are, don't be afraid. Stand up for what is right. We don't need to resort to violence or destruction. That's not the Catholic way. The Catholic way is to pray, do penance, make reparation, and offer this Mass for the opening of hearts. Let's pray to Saint Solanus Casey for his intercession. God bless you. God